Coming up on today's Locked on Bucks, Damian Lillard continues his offseason tour, if you will, opening up about what last season was like for Dame, the summer specifically, when he knew things may not be quite right for him. He goes into that rivalry with the Pacers and some interesting tidbits on playing with Giannis and Khris Middleton and the adjustment that required. So we get into that conversation, plus one of the Olympic heroes finds a home in the NBA. We discuss next on Locked on Bucks.
You are Locked on Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked on Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked on Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, as well as some of you have joined us for today's live stream. That's all part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked on Bucks is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, Camille, it feels like we've done this version of the episode a couple of times so far when it's, hey, Damian Lillard opens up. He had the interview and the sit-down with Jim Owczarski of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel a week ago, and now Damian Lillard back at it once more as he was the most recent guest on the Club 520 podcast, hosted by Jeff Teague and some others, and opened up about a lot of things in the conversation that ranged about an hour and 15 minutes. We mentioned at the top of the show all the high points that there were, but where do you want to start with this? What stood out to you the most about that conversation from Dame?
The fact that it's Jeff Teague, no, I'm joking. Jeff Teague making just comments of like, yeah, I ain't been in Milwaukee in a bit. They not too happy with me there. But no, jokes aside, it was most likely just hearing Dame again, the transparency that he has and just mentioning what it was like playing with Giannis. I think that piece of it is something that we've heard a bit about, but just him talking about like how Giannis came to him and was like, hey, listen, man, like I'm used to just going. We're both trying to figure this out. So like, if you need the ball, like I need you to tell me that you need the ball in this moment. Like, I won't use the exact language that Dame said that Giannis used with him, but pretty much saying like, listen, man, if you want the ball, you have to call for it because I'm focused and I'm going to be going.
Yeah.
So just them trying to learn that, as well as him talking about the moments where they felt like they were finally getting that synergy together. And he referenced the 2 LA games that they had on the road this year where he felt like, okay, I had like, a double-double. Giannis had like a double-double. And we are sitting here like, okay, this is what it looks like. Like the result might not have been what we wanted, but it's starting to look like what we wanted to. And figuring out what that looks like was super interesting to me. And hearing when they felt like, I finally can see it.
I thought what was good about this particular interview was it hit a lot, as we mentioned, of the high points and the stuff that we've talked about throughout the season. We talked about it in Jim Owczarski's profile and interview with Dame as well, but we got deeper into it and got more details. Like, of course, we knew Damian Lillard was going through a lot in the offseason with the trade, the personal things. He addressed that as well. We said it was going to take time for Dame and Giannis to develop that chemistry, and I think we've all kind of kept pointing to those things, but haven't provided a ton of details about, okay, why is it going to take time? And what is it? Things like what you just mentioned there of, the conversations that he had with Giannis. If you got to call for the ball, even talking about Dame suggesting to Giannis, look, I need to know these things too, because I need to know when I need to be ready. If you get me the ball, I can knock down a couple of shots. That's going to free up some space. But as he mentioned, I've seen Giannis, attack 3 guys at once and still get to the hole and dunk. So that was the adjustment for me, was even when you saw things were walled off and there was a double team, it didn't mean the ball was kicking out to me. He didn't mean that as a bad thing either. Giannis is a ball hog. Just like, I don't have those years of playing with you and the familiarity and that chemistry that I don't know some of these things that Khris Middleton knows. So I need some of that communication to figure out, Do I look for the ball in these spots? Do I know you take over in these spots? Where do I need to position myself? How can I pull defenders away from Giannis? So that part was interesting. And I mean, music to all of our ears, at least you and I, the way that he spoke very, very highly of Chris Middleton too, where he was quick to point out, I've never had this before, where I played with a great player at the same time. It was very different from Portland. I knew that was going to be the case coming into the season as well. I didn't expect to have the same numbers that I did with the Blazers, and then quickly pointed out, well, two great players, because Khris is great as well. And I don't think people fully appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, he even pulled the curtain back a little bit on the way that he sees guys training. Like, he mentioned the fact that he'll go in the gym and Giannis has 4 guys just consistently following him while he's trying to,
Harder.
make his move. Right, over and over, which goes to what you were saying, Justin, about the fact that he's watching and seeing that Giannis is walled off, and he might think like, oh, the ball's coming my way, and then Giannis just dunks on him, and he's just like, oh. It also seemed like one of those situations as well where it's like, I've watched you play, but now that I'm on the team with you, seeing you day in and day out, I'm a little bit more amazed at the ways that you can score the ball. So yeah, it was really interesting hearing their dynamics, as well as Dame just talking about the fact, like, I know the season wasn't right, but like, it's consistency. I have still been a very consistent player. Him talking about feeling like he's been slept on as well as a player, and just mentioning the fact, I forget which one of the co-hosts mentioned the fact, but like, they're like, behind Steph Curry, like it's you. Like, you are one of the greatest shooters of all time, and people don't talk about that too much. And again, just kind of seeing that chip on Dame's shoulder, where he's like, he's confident in who he is. He's confident about what he's been able to bring to the table in the past as well. But he looks ahead and he's like, but I can feel people don't really see it, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it. And that all ties into the feeling I'm getting around this team, which is this air of like, we have something to prove and we're ready to go out there and do it. And I was saying it on Twitter the other day, but I was like, maybe I'm too optimistic about the Bucks, but I feel really good about this squad.
Yeah, it's been like, the message you get from Dame is, and as we mentioned, this started after Game 6 in what was essentially his exit interviews. Look, keep sleeping on us, because next year you're going to see, and you just kind of get this sense collectively that we're good. Like, we're fine with all the attention going to Philly and what they did, and Boston as the reigning champions, and look at what the Knicks did, and are the Pacers on the come up. We are perfectly fine with being excluded from that conversation and kind of lost in the shuffle. The big thing is, we've kind of mentioned this before. I don't know if putting a target on yourself is the right way to phrase it, but we've heard a lot of this, and like, you got to see it, because it's not just Dame, it's everybody that spoke about, oh, next year is going to be different. And we had X, Y, and Z that happened last year, and all of that is understandable. But now we've got to see that consistency. He did talk about, as we mentioned, the Indiana Pacers. And, one of the other interesting parts in this conversation, at least I thought, was when he described the timeline of events and how that happened with him arriving in Milwaukee. And when he, I don't think he put it this way, but basically knew, I don't know if things are quite right yet, that I'm not where I need to be. So we will get into that conversation as we continue to recap Damian Lillard's appearance on the Club 520 podcast, coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, we all are in the self-improvement business, at least most of us. Maybe that's you going to the gym, where you have designated gym days and days where you work on some things. Your self-care non-negotiables. Maybe it's leg day that you never skip. Well, you should include therapy day in there as well. If you've been thinking of starting therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and most importantly, it is suited to your schedule. To get started, all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire. After you do that, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. As we know, there's no offseason in the NBA. Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Speaking of, you were just on that, Camille.
Yes, I was. Episode about contenders and pretenders. And again, it made me have to check myself like, am I too optimistic about this Milwaukee Bucks team? But maybe it's because we watch them, day in and day out, follow everything. But like, I feel really good about their chances this season, of course, assuming that they remain healthy.
So getting back to the Damian Lillard conversation, I mentioned a couple of areas. The one that I want to start with here was he talked about the offseason and mentioned I'm sure part of the audience is probably, yeah, we've heard this before. But when he went over the timeline of events, how everything unfolded, he mentioned the divorce and personal stuff that he was dealing with, the complicated things, needing to pass a physical, so that dramatically reduced everything he was doing in terms of physical activity in the offseason, and mentioned, look, I had all this going on. I knew I was going to be traded. I just didn't know where. And I think on the surface, it's probably easy to dismiss that and say, come on, man, you made it pretty clear you wanted to go to the Miami Heat. You had to assume that's where you're going, but that's not where he went. So there is some validity to that. And then talked about, look, I was traded, a week before training camp. My first day in Milwaukee, we go through workouts. That's the first time I'm meeting Giannis, at least formally, other than just, other games in the All-Star game. Khris, all of my teammates, my coach. The next day is media day. The next day is my first practice with that group, and training camp begins. So you got a better sense of it. When we talked about it was a whirlwind and this happened all before the season. No, one after another. He comes to Milwaukee, finds an apartment to move things into. Next day, meets the teammates. Next day, media day. Next day, practice. And mentioned in that first practice, there was a sequence of events where Giannis gets the rebound, is pushing it up the floor, and throws an outlet to Damian Lillard, and he jumps up to get the pass and comes down, basically a foot out of bounds. And that's when he said he knew, oh, I'm not in the shape, the condition, the whole package feels off here. And I think that's kind of what we saw throughout the course of the season, especially with those two. You would see those flashes, but going back to what he said and how he detailed it earlier, that consistency was just never there.
Yeah, when he mentioned that particular moment of like training camp, I knew in this moment, like something isn't all the way right with me, because he's like, I don't catch the ball out of bounds. Like, this is a routine thing. I don't do this. And when I did it, I was just kind of like, oh shoot, like this is going to be an interesting season. And he mentioned the fact that, again, it's not necessarily new. It was just the level of detail that he went into on this particular podcast. But he said, like, that was the battle all season of me just trying to find who I am, so on and so forth. And with Dame coming out and saying this, like, I know there's a subset of people who feel like Dame talks too much, or there's too much media attention around Dame and what he does, so on and so forth. But one thing I love about that is, one, getting a glimpse inside and understanding a bit more of what he was going through, getting some team insights that you wouldn't get from anyone else besides somebody who is on the team. But in addition to that, the fact that he holds himself accountable. Like, it's not like Dame is running from what happened last season at all. Like, on the other side, like, he's really just embracing it. Like, yeah, this is what happened. I know I can be better. I plan to be better. But yet and still, let's not forget, I was giving you guys 26-7. Like, yet and still, I know I'm not right, but I am still able to produce. And I'm telling you, like, now that I'm getting my feet underneath me, it's going to be even better next year. So question that I have for you, Justin, with this particular podcast that he was on, and I see the comment from This World Ain't For the Week in here just about him doing a podcast with Jeff Teague. Like, do you have any problems with Bucks players going out there and getting these different media, availabilities, talking about how things are going? Because for years, one thing we've been used to with this Bucks team is that you don't hear too much from them. And then again, with Doc Rivers coming aboard, with Damian Lillard, two guys who aren't media shy at all, not media hogs either, but like, they don't mind talking. If you ask them the question, they're going to answer it. So like, do you have any problems with that, or do you enjoy getting the additional insights?
I mean, I suppose it's a double-edged sword. I enjoy getting the additional insights, but to the point that's been raised by a few people. Oh, okay. I think we've heard this. I think you probably hit that level with Doc Rivers of, okay, man, just you don't need to constantly point out how difficult last season was. We get it. And I think with Dame, this should probably be it, right? That this is the final appearance because now it's starting to drift towards that territory. As we mentioned, we got a lot more detail and insights behind it. So it wasn't just the high, and that's not a knock at what we got from Jim Ozarski, but we got more. Dame's going to open up with former players, and guys that he played in the league with more than anybody else. So that was the good part of this one. But now I think we've kind of fleshed everything out. So I'm probably good from here on out, at least with that duo. If Khris Middleton and Giannis and others are going to do that, great. But I think when it comes to Dame and Doc, I think we've heard everything we need to know about last season.
That's fair. That's fair. And I think, the other piece of it that you mentioned from this interview that stood out was, of course, the Pacers conversation, the Pacers talk, especially with Jeff Teague having to own up the fact that he was very pro Pacers throughout that series, so on and so forth. But again, just hearing how he was like, hey, they got us last year, and that the game is the game. I think is the wording that he used, which I love, which is true. Like, that is how it is. For years, Dame has been doing the Dame time celebrations, and when Tyrese Halliburton did it back, he's like, the game is the game, but understand that also puts a target on you. So I'm coming back for you. So again, this is a new rivalry here for the Bucks, but I do enjoy that, we have something cooking here against the Pacers.
Well, and even, going back to, what was it, early January when Malik Beasley did that interview where he kind of foreshadowed what was going to happen. Dame basically said the same thing. He didn't go as far as, it's not going to be pretty for them, but saying we kind of got the sense, like our first matchup, I didn't play in. That's where Giannis had one of his many huge games against the Pacers. Then we played him in the in-season tournament. The incident that you described happened. And, as he said, look, that's fine. I do Dame time to other guys. Talked about what Russell Westbrook would do, and guys would take offense with that too. And so you gotta know that's part of the game, but you got to back it up. And kind of mentioned collectively, it sounded as if we think we're going to get the Pacers in the playoffs. And as he started to get closer to the finish line, that was basically looking more and more likely. I mean, how many times did we have the conversation of, well, do you want the Pacers? Do you want Philly? Do you want Miami? So you knew there was a very good chance, and, indicated they were kind of relishing that. And okay, it's time for both of us to put everything aside and who's going to back this up. But we weren't healthy. And talked about his health too in that series and how it started to take a turn for the worse. No Giannis, obviously, and that was the bigger disappointment of we didn't feel like we really properly got to show ourselves against the Pacers. When we, talking just a couple of moments ago too about, I think we've kind of heard everything now. I think we're good on the Dame and Doc Rivers front. At least we also didn't hear from Dame hey, wait until next year, Indy. We're going to show you otherwise. He just kind of left it at that.
Which I like, because to your point, like the Pacers stuff, we saw them a lot last year. So it goes without saying, but to hear Dame again, that confidence in the team of like, yeah, we understand, like they got us last year. It is what it is, but like we feel good about the next time that we're going to see them. Again, he didn't go as far as Malik Beasley did. Well, it ain't going to be pretty for them, but he did make sure, like, the game is the game and I'm ready to play it. So like this next season, let's lace them up and let's get back to it, because that's what's part of the fun of hooping, of the competition. It's having somebody where you're like, it's like when you have that big cousin who always beats you on the video games and you're like, I cannot wait to get a chance to come and play my big cousin again. So again, I enjoyed the interview outside of just the Bucks specific stuff, just hearing him talk about like his rap career, talking about his favorite players in the league, talking about which one of his game winners was like his favorite, just getting to know Dame even more. I thought it was an overall pretty good interview on Club 520. So I would encourage everyone, if you're not fatigued from hearing from Damian Lillard, to definitely check that one out. I thought it was pretty fun.
All of it. Yeah. I mean, especially early when he talks about coming up through the AAU circuit, going to Weber State, the guys that he faced in the NBA, kind of transitions, as you mentioned, into his favorite players in the league, some of the infamous battles he's had with Russell Westbrook, and what can kind of tie into our next segment here. his favorite game winner, because I think Bucks fans are hoping he has a version 2 of that game winner, especially who it came against. We'll get into those details and another move made by that player's team coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you about our friends over at GameTime. We've all, Camille and I, talked about our experience using other ticketing services and how much that changes once you use GameTime. They take all of the hassles and worries out of finding your tickets for whatever event it is you're going to, out of the mix, the easiest process that you can find. They offer zone deals where you can save in advance when you're purchasing your tickets there. You can see the view from the seat as well. Maybe you're checking off a stadium tour or an arena tour this upcoming fall for Bucks games on the road. See your view from the seat in a panoramic view, especially helpful for those venues you haven't been to before. Get your all-in price as well. Toggle on that feature and you see what it's going to cost you with those tickets. No sticker shock once you get to that checkout screen. Best of all, it comes with the lowest price guarantee. GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference for those seats if you can find them cheaper elsewhere, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So when Dame was talking about his favorite game-winning shots, it should be a no-brainer. He's had a few, though, as we mentioned, but it should be a no-brainer when you think about the more infamous game-winning shots that we've seen in the last few decades. That game winner against the Oklahoma City Thunder, which he shot over Paul Pierce, the infamous bad shot, three-pointer to eliminate the Oklahoma City Thunder from the playoffs, when he was asked, what's your favorite shot, and presented two options. Kind of thought it was a crazy question. I mean, come on. Of course, it's that one. And we mentioned, look, Bucks fans are hoping there's another one of those in the bag for Dame, because Paul Pierce is now on one of those teams we mentioned getting all the attention in the Eastern Conference, in the Philadelphia 76ers. They're getting even more attention now, Camille, because last week we talked about one of the standout players from the Olympics indicating he wants to return to the NBA. And we speculated, look, next summer, he's got about a $2.5 million buyout. That number doubled after the Olympics started. Next summer, he could be an interesting target for the Bucks and some other teams. Well, he's worked out the buyout now and has signed a 1-year vet minimum deal with the 76ers. That, of course, Gerson Yabusele. So I suppose there's two ways to look at this. Number one, man, really, Philly, another move and another one of those guys for the vet minimum when you will look up and down at all those moves they made in the offseason. Or, look, I know it was the Olympics, but just as we kind of push back of let's not jump to any broad conclusions here of bring Papa Giannis in and have him replace Brook Lopez because he looked fine holding up on switches in Olympic games. The last time we saw Gerson Yabusele in the NBA, it didn't go well. And look, he looked like a much different player in the Olympics. I'm not looking at this as a panic move of, man, Philadelphia keeps getting everything. It's kind of wait and see. It has potential to be that. There is potential that he worked on all those things, his conditioning, his three-point shooting, and this could be a massive signing, but I'm not quite there yet.
I don't blame you for not being there. We know that Olympic ball, guys are playing in roles that are going to be far different from the roles that they play on an NBA team. And for Yabusele, like, it came down a lot to that three-point shooting. When he was in the league beforehand, he just did not have that shot down. If that is real for him going forward, as well as the defensive energy that he can bring as kind of like a small big, he could definitely be a good role player for any team that, is a contender, because contending teams all need that same skill set from certain players. So I mean, it's just another good pickup, I think, for the 76ers, a team that had an offseason plan of coming in like, we need to land a big fish with all this cap space that we have. They did so with Paul George. They were able to extend Maxey. They have Embiid, so you have your big three core there, and then you build around them. Like, I mean, they brought in Andre Drummond. A lot of signings where you're like, in a vacuum, not super impressive, but I mean, you bring in Andre Drummond, you bring in Eric Gordon, Reggie Jackson, Caleb Martin. Like it's been a pretty good offseason for them. Kyle Lowry came back. They got Kelly Oubre back. And then you take a chance on Yabusele, where it's like we saw him have a really big summer. It's a minimum. They did have to pay that buyout fee, but outside of that, like you got him on a minimum, and then you just see how it plays out. You go into training camp, another body, somebody who seems to be able to add to it. So I'm here for it. Like, it makes sense for Philly. I'm glad that he's getting another shot in the NBA. I saw that that's what he wanted. Like, I'm waiting for my next opportunity back in the league. So good for him. It's nice to see an Olympic performance turn into a contract. I mean, even Patty Mills got picked up shortly thereafter the Olympics as well. So It's always cool to see that Olympic bump for some guys.
Yeah, and it's a good signing, right? Like, I'm not trying to say it's Gerson Yabusele. It's not that good. Like, it has potential to be a great signing. I just don't think we can immediately say, wow, this is a fantastic signing. I mean, he's more than worth a flyer for a vet minimum at this point, especially given that Philly needed some help in their front court. They needed to address the power forward position and bring in more size. Caleb Martin's going to start at the 4 for them, which is fine, right? For spurts and to close games to give you more defensive versatility. But as we've talked about with Bobby Portis and guys like that, you know, if you use the phrase in baseball of innings eaters, you need that. You need guys that can eat up those regular season minutes and give you production. And I think it was starting to get to the point where, especially Sixers fans, were like, okay, what are we going to do here for that last spot? And for power forward, Marcus Morris, are we entertaining that? Maybe Davis Bertans that you bring in. So I'm all for bringing in Gerson Yabusele, not for the Sixers, but for the Bucks or anybody else, over players like that. And it's going to be interesting how things unfold for Philadelphia next summer, because just as we talked about with Gary Trent Jr. for the Bucks, it's a vet minimum. It's a great signing. If he plays to the level that you think he is capable of, he's far outplayed that vet minimum price tag next year, when that could be what the Bucks have to deal with. Once again, things start to open up a little more as we've talked about next summer. But you know, that's the challenge that you have with those vet minimums, is it's all you have and you hope you find something that works. But if it does, it's not the easiest to retain them. So that is one potential issue for the 76ers. It was just the last team I wanted to see Gerson Yabusele sign with, even if he went back to Boston and said, let's try this a second time with the Celtics. Like, all right, fine. But yeah, it was the sense of, man, Philadelphia really gets everything they want this summer, huh?
Yeah, they had a really good offseason. It all looks good on paper. It all looks really good. This is a Philly team that we haven't seen get out of the second round during the Joel Embiid era so far yet. So I'm sure they're putting everything in line to try to make that a reality for them this season. Of course, if it comes at the expense of the Bucks, don't want to see that. But if it's a situation where it ends up being, you know, Milwaukee, Philly, then so be it. But a quick question, you as we wrap up here. Were there any other players from the Olympics that you saw and you were like, I think they might get a shot in the NBA, or someone who you wanted to see get another shot in the NBA, or was like Yabusele one and Patty Mills, since he was unsigned so at the time? But was there anyone else who you were like, he might actually have another life in the NBA if another team can take a shot on him?
Yeah, I mean, it was clearly Papillon. No, I mean, I think Yabusele was really it. The Patty Mills piece was interesting too, because it seems like, well, this is death taxes and Patty Mills having some type of showing in Europe, in international play, and finding a new home there. But Yabusele was really it because of the age, and I think the position that he played. I mean, a guy that in Eurobasket has really worked on his shot the last few years to become a 41, I think, percent 3-point shooter. He always had the size, right? He was always a guy that you're not going to move him around, but from the looks of it, and again, this is the danger of only looking at 2 weeks of Olympic play and saying, well, this is who the guy is. From the looks of it, he has added a lot to his game in terms of mobility and conditioning and everything else, where if he's the guy we saw in the Olympics, he's what you're looking for in terms of a stretch five. And if the shot is there at the NBA level as well, not to discount it, but let's also keep in mind, it's not quite as long in the NBA or in international play as the 3-point shot is in the NBA. But he was the guy that I thought was far and away the one that would be, if you're going to take a not even a flyer, because we've seen him in the league before, but if you're going to roll the dice on a guy that had been in the league before, he's the one that stands out the most.
Yeah. Same for me. There wasn't anyone else on the men's side where I was like, I can see that contract coming. Gabby Williams was the other one on the women's side where I was like, yeah, she has to find another French, player where it's like, she has to find her way back into the W. But yeah, I was just curious, but it's cool always to see when Olympic play does lead to another NBA contract. So good for him. Just hope that doesn't work out super well for Philly at the detriment of the Milwaukee Bucks.
Well, and I suppose the last thing to point out here is why we say, okay, here's where it's going to get interesting for Philly is when you look at how they've rounded out their roster. Andre Drummond was a 1-year deal. So he is 25, 26. He has the player option for $5 million. If he outplays that, what do you do at the backup 5? Kelly Oubre is in the same boat with a player option. Yabusele is going to be an unrestricted free agent. So you're starting to slowly piece together these deals that were good deals. Eric Gordon as well, another one, veteran minimum, another one of those guys that Philly got. That's the challenge with rounding out, as we've seen when you look at the roster overturn that the Bucks have had. Okay, it works 1 year. What are you going to do in the second year? How much are you going to pay them? Can you pay them? And if not, who do you replace them with? But those are all discussions to be had later down the road and problems for the 76ers to figure out, and not so much the Bucks. But yes, disappointing that about a week after we specifically highlighted Gerson Yabusele and his play in the Olympics and what he had done in Eurobasket of, hey, is this a guy the Bucks could potentially look at for a vet minimum next summer? He is gone off the board to the 76ers for that veteran minimum. Coming up later this week, we have started to kick around our draft that we discussed. So we've determined the order and the parameters of the draft, and now we just have to conduct the draft between you, Frank, and myself of NBA win totals and seeing who's the best at projecting who is going to outperform their projected win totals this season, provided by FanDuel. So we'll have that at some point this week. Also, we mentioned Giannis and Dame and Khris Middleton on today's show, the Bucks' big three. How does that stack up against some other big threes in the league? And there was a different draft that took place on the most recent episode of the Hoop Collective podcast that Giannis was included in as well. So we'll get into that and some thoughts on his standing in the league. So still a lot coming up this week here on Locked On Bucks. We thank you for making this your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On NBA, where the season never ends, getting national expertise with a local perspective. You can find that Locked On NBA link in the description, so you don't need to search for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.